Hello, Sarah. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to learn more about India's generic drug industry. Recently, there has been widespread controversy in China regarding generic drugs. Since India has already developed a very strong generic drug industry, I would like to gain a better understanding of it. This might also help our Chinese people compare the differences between the generic drug systems and industries of both countries. So, my first question is India's strong generic drug industry primarily due to the well-known compulsory licensing policy? This policy is so famous that it was even featured in a Chinese movie, Dying to Survive, which shows how well-known it is.
The policy of compulsory licensing was not the beginning. The starting point was in 1970 when India introduced a new patent act which abolished patent protection for pharmaceutical products and retained patents only for manufacturing process. This provided a legal basis for Indian pharmaceutical companies to bypass the patent restrictions of original drug by altering production process, enabling mass production of generic medicines. In addition to Patent Act, the compulsory licensing policy you just mentioned is also crucial. More importantly, Indian law allows generic drug produced in India to be exported to other countries. Indian pharmaceutical companies can not only legally infringe patents with India but also sell resulting infringing products to other countries, something that is important in any other country in the world because of this early implementation of the compulsory licensing policy. India's generic drug industry has flourished. By 1990s, Indian generic drug has entered the US market, albeit only after the patents had expired. Renowned Indian generic drug companies such as Sun Pharma, Dr. Reddy's and Cipla have established significant market shares in United States. The success of these companies in entering US market is legally due to the compulsory licensing policy. For instance, when they identify a drug still under patent, they prepare its supply chain in advance, waiting for the patent to expire. Once the patent expires, Indian companies quickly submit and supplement the necessary materials and tests according to the generic drug requirement of Europe and United States, enabling their generic drugs to hit the market there swiftly. India's regulatory framework for generic drugs closely align with the developed countries in Europe and United States, which significantly ensures the quality of Indian generic drugs and facilitates their rapid entry into these markets. Currently, India is advancing even faster in the US market.
Since this policy has brought so many benefits, are there any drawbacks about it?
Yes, of course, this policy has indeed brought significant development to India's generic drug industry. However, because of this policy, almost all pharmaceutical companies around the world are reluctant to establish new drug research and development facilities in India. They only maintain partial production lines in India, focusing on activities like process scale up, technology transfer. This is because they know patents cannot be adequately protected in India. As a result, these companies engage only in joint ventures of production purpose, avoiding R&D activities with the sole objective of lowering drug prices and relying purely on manufacturing for profits. Given the enormous cost of new drug development, often amounting to billions of dollars, India neither has the willingness nor the capacity to bear much expenses. Ultimately, the compulsory licensing policy has reduced drug prices, making them affordable for Indians, but it has also left India without a robust new drug research and development industry. The strength of India's pharmaceutical sector lies in generic drugs, while its presence in the field of new drug development is also non existent. The issue is also reflected in India's pharmaceutical labor market. The salaries of the formulation specialists who work on the later stages of drug development are the highest among pharmaceutical R&D related positions. In contrast, positions in early stage research such as DMPK are relatively lower paid. This is exact opposite of the situation in developed countries in Europe and United States.
Yes, actually, China has faced similar issues in recent years. In the past, China was the only country outside of Europe and the US where global pharmaceutical giants established their R&D centers. But in the past 2 years, as far as I know, many foreign companies have shut down their R&D centers in China. The main reasons are low research efficiency, numerous restrictions, and rapidly rising R&D costs. As a result, many Western pharmaceutical companies have had to close their facilities. Before we start our discussion, I did some research, and I found that the average salary in the pharmaceutical R&D sector is relatively high. A middle-level technician can earn an annual income of around 100,000 RMB or more in China.
This level of income can be considered part of high-income group in India.
So, could the difference in labor costs be one of the reasons why India has a greater advantage over China in the generic drug industry?
Yes, I think this is also a contributing factor.
Can I ask you about the general production process of generic drugs? With so many different types of drugs on the market, how do Indian generic drug companies decide which drugs to produce? Is there a selection criteria?
When a new drug is still undergoing clinical trials and approval, many generic drug companies begin tracking it. These companies often have dedicated new drug tracking departments with their own clinical terms to analyze the reported clinical data. They collaborate with business department to evaluate the potential market for the drug and based on their analysis decide where to initiate R&D and generic drug production plans for that drug. The raw material for producing generic drugs primarily come from intermediates of active pharmaceutical ingredients, APIs, the key compound used to synthesize new drugs, which are mostly imported from China. India then carries out the third stage of synthesis, followed by formulation and human bioequivalence studies. The production process of drug involves synthesis of the raw API, converting it into a formulation and then bringing it to market. In addition to production, India's contract research organization CROs are highly developed. Indian CROs excel in clinical trials, bioequivalence studies, and compliance with bioequivalence standards. Their supporting infrastructure is also very advanced. Typically, companies that start preparing early, well before the patent expires, by synthesizing the required raw material and preparing formulations in advance. The production of raw material is strictly conducted in compliance with US FDA standards because selling generic drugs in the US markets requires FDA scrutiny of entire API manufacturing process. Every stage must meet FDA requirements and Indian companies produce all manufacturing and inspection documents in full compliance.
So, which stage of the process is the most important? I think that for generic drugs, effectiveness might be the most crucial factor.
Bioequivalence testing is the most critical factor in determining whether a generic drug can be successfully marketed. Although generic drugs and original drugs are the same compound, slight differences between them can lead to significant variations in efficacy. For example, when the active ingredient may be the same compound, different in crystallization can be solubility. If the solubility is different, the drug absorption in the body may also vary, leading to non-equivalence. Similarly, difference in the excipients used can result in varying non-equivalence. Varying the release and profit can be varied as well within the body. Without effective bioequivalence testing, it is difficult to ensure that the generic drug and the original drug are equivalent, making it impossible to guarantee the quality of medication. This is critical because therapeutic efficacy is the most important measure of a drug's quality and the key factor in evaluating the performance. Bioequivalence tests primarily compare the pharmacokinetics differences between the original drug and generic drug in healthy individuals to determine whether their therapeutic effects are equivalent. Typically, 24 healthy volunteers are given both the original drug and generic drug under fasting and postprandial conditions. Blood concentrations are measured over time to calculate pharmacokinetic parameters for each individual. These parameters are statistically analyzed to determine whether there is a statistically significant similarity. If the result indicates similarity, it is concluded that two drugs are therapeutically equivalent.
Is the cost of bioequivalence studies higher in Western countries? Since this involves healthy individuals participating in the trials, I assume the expenses might be greater.
Oh, that's an excellent question. Similar issues indeed exist in bioequivalence testing in Europe and United States, but they found better way to reduce costs, taking the US as an example. Many bioequivalence studies have undergone significant changes, especially they are more exploring ways to compare bioequivalence without requiring participants to take the medication. In 1984, the US introduced a comprehensive framework and concept for generic drug, along with numerous exemption policies for various types of generic drugs. By 2016, after 32 years of implementation, the US Food and Drug Administration (FDA) began new attempts to replace traditional bioequivalence studies with in vitro experiment combined with computers simulations. This large-scale exemptions initiative aimed to eliminate the need for bioequivalence testing in generic drug industry whenever possible.
Wow, technology truly changes lives. It looks like the future of the generic drug industry will benefit the public at an ever lower cost. Thank you very much. Your answers are extremely professional and have truly broadened my horizons.